Hello everyone, and welcome back to Crossing Crafts. Last episode we made it... Alright, that was weird. As I was saying, last episode I made a tiny Minecraft pocket diorama. Here it is now, and I really wanted to make another one, but I have... Okay, what the heck is that noise? Oh no, it's a ghast, and he's shooting suggestions for this video. I can't hold him off. In all seriousness, if you want to see how I made this nether-themed Minecraft pocket diorama, then be sure to subscribe and like the video. I make a ton of cute mobs towards the end, so be sure to stick around for that. Before anything else, this build was suggested to me because this Altoid tin was red, and commenters suggested I make it nether themed, so thank you Sunny and Mayonnaise for the idea. The first step is to get rid of this embossing on the back of the tin so I can start flat and fresh for our back layer. Our back layer will be comprised of two colors, so I'm gonna mix the orange up right now as well as a light blue off camera. This diorama will have two biomes, a normal nether biome as well as a warped forest. And I'm going to use this handy dandy acrylic roller I got recently to flatten out the orange clay. I'm going to use some grids I made and printed out to cut it to the size of the tin and to help me in cutting the right amount of space for the blue section. And using the part of the grid that I've already cut out, I'm able to have the perfect sized blue puzzle piece. I'm going to press them together so they stick and attach it to the back of the tin. And while that bakes, I'm going to mix up our first batch of Netherrack clay. It's a bit more vibrant than actual Netherrack, but that's because it's going to be hidden behind a lot of stuff later, so I wanted to make it a little bit easier to see. I used a Sharpie to block off the shape I want, and then I indented the grid into the clay. When I attached it to the back, it felt a bit bland, so I decided to add some blue strips on top to act as the warped nilium that you see in the warped biome. And yes, these blocks do have a name besides bluegrass. I did not know that before this video, and I'm also only 50% confident that I'm pronouncing it correctly. It could be pronounced nilium instead of nilium, but it's a made-up Minecraft word. Merriam-Webster doesn't have a gamer's dictionary, so my apologies if it's wrong. But with the nilium in, we can add the warped fungus / trees. I'll use the terms interchangeably, but you get the point, they're badass looking mushrooms. These trees look super cool and have very striking stems, so I wanted to marble purple and teal clay to mimic the effect. It kinda worked. I do it again later in the video and it gets a little better, but I've never marbled clay before, so if you guys know any techniques that would work better, do let me know in the comments. And once I had a nice selection of stems, I start adding the actual warped nether wart that grows on the stems like leaves. The last thing I decided to make for the background was a twisting vine to add between some of the trees. I baked it beforehand and used some bacon bond to secure it to the background. And just kidding, we still have one more thing to do before we can divide the two sides with Netherrack, and it might leave you aghast. Cause it's gonna be a ghast. Oh, I'm sorry. Bad jokes aside, I measure out how much space I want this guy to take up and mix up a light gray clay. These mobs are pretty wrinkly, so I decided to take part of the light clay and mix it with some more black clay until it was just the right shade of gray, which is hard considering that there are at least 50 of them. I cut out his body and used some bacon bond to secure him to the background. Then I add his legs. Then I add his face pixel by pixel. He is about as cute as he can get, and now we can finally cover up the seam between the two colors with some netherrack. I'm gonna first cut out exactly where I want the netherrack to cover up, and then mix up a whole lot of the reddish purple clay I need. Now, I'm gonna be honest, I did draw up a plan for this build, but adding the netherrack is kinda where I just went out on a whim, doing things without much of a plan, so just trust the process. The first part was using the grid we cut out earlier to create the first layer of separation, so I cut that out, indented the grid into the clay, and added some clay to the hinges to make it stay up. I had to put a block of clay on the inside so it wouldn't fall over like that again. Originally, I had two sizes of square grids I planned to use, which is why this second layer had big squares, but I ended up not liking it very much and would cover this up later. My goal was to make it look like the warped forest was under a cliff of netherrack, so I pre-baked a bunch of different shapes and just added layers until I was satisfied with how it looked. Before I could fully finish up the netherrack, I mixed up a super bright magma orange and cut out enough to fill most of the bottom tin up. From there, I could cover up the edges for what would eventually be our warped forest floor. I also decided to add a bit more surface area to the warped forest because it felt a bit too small and flat, and I also thought that this diorama added cool dimension by coming out of the tin so much. I cut up the first layer of Nilium and slowly expanded from there, covering the last bit of the tin and adding the grid along the way. Once I felt I had enough space, I added some texture on the sides of the Nilium blocks since it basically is just blue grass. And after adding it all the way around the warped forest, I realized that the regular nether biome is lacking a bit of dimension. So I mixed up a slightly darker colored netherrack and used that to add some diversity and to cover up anything I didn't like. Then once that was all on, I tried my darndest to make a pattern in the clay that somewhat resembled glowstone so I could hang it under the cliff. And once that was all on, I mixed up an even more vibrant purple and teal pattern, and wow, it is a huge improvement from the last one. It looks so good, and it feels way more like the warped stem than the last batch. For reference, here they are side by side. Then I attached the stems to the floor and began making and attaching the warped fungus to the top of the trees. I actually really love how the fungus appears more randomly on warped and crimson trees in the nether. I really wish they would add some more variants for the overworld trees or just new overworld trees entirely. I mean, willow trees in the swamps, come on, and sakura trees in flower forests. I mean, at least give me different colored leaves already, okay? The options are endless. I'm gonna stop complaining about the updates I want for Minecraft now because this channel is about crafting. And we've just about finished the warped trees, which means it's time for me to switch gears and add a bit of lava at the top of the cliff. I just take the same magma orange and add pieces where I see fit. The reason I made a little edge on the side with the logo was because I wanted to put a piglin there that was trapped between netherrack and lava. So I made the lava flow in 3 different directions to accomplish that. And after looking at it for a while, I realized that the orange behind the ghast was a bit bland, so I decided to make thin streams of magma flow from behind him. With that, we can now focus on all the little thingamabobs that make biomes come to life, starting off with some warped roots. And these are super easy. All I had to do was cut some Minecraft grass first and use a thin roll of clay to cut circles off of. I'd then attach these circles to the top of alternating pieces of grass. And now it's time to be a fun guy and make some fungi. But to make the warped fungus, I'm cutting out long rectangles of blue clay and pressing in some different sized pre-baked orange pieces. I also used some of the darker netherrack clay to be the thin rectangular stems. And once all of them are baked, I can assemble them with some super glue and my tweezers. And now it's time to make some nether mobs. First up, the hoglins. These are probably my favorite mob in the nether just because of how huge and stupid they look. I chose to make 2 of them, 1 full-sized and 1 baby hoglin. Their bigger parts are all varying sized rectangles, so they're super easy, but their smaller parts, like their eyes, horns, and ears, I chose to pre-bake and attach with some bacon bond. And then I gave them both their black back scruff. The big hoglin had 1 piece that went on its forehead, so I made sure to include that as well. And now it's time for the striders. These guys are, I didn't just eat hot Cheetos. It's the dye from the clay, I swear. But anyway, their main shape is really easy. It's just a big cube and their legs are tiny little rectangles. The tricky part was the hair things on the side of their head that I had to carefully glue on, as well as some tiny gray scales. I couldn't record any of it because I had to keep them like half an inch away from my pupils to do it properly, but anyway. Now we can move on to my Scuffed Endermen and Baby Endermen. You don't really see them that much in the final product because they look a bit rough, but it's the thought that counts. And now we can move on to making all of the piglin variations. I really wanted to give them all cool poses. I wanted one to be running away from the magma charge, I wanted one stuck on a cliff, I wanted one riding a strider, and honestly they all turned out really cute with a ton of personality. To make their bodies, I basically formed an assembly line, adding all of their parts and then shaping their legs and arms in the poses that I wanted. For their eyes, noses, horns, and ears, I used the pre-baked pieces that I already made for the hoglins and just made them smaller to fit on their tiny faces. I also gave this little guy a fishing rod because why not? I wanted to make the magma charge a bit more 3D looking, so I cut up one square and added slightly smaller pieces on every side. Then I mixed up some yellow and orange clay and cut tiny cuboid shapes onto every side of the charge. Last but not least is the fire, and I cut out random rectangles from a long sheet of orange clay, adding more tiny rectangles that were yellow and white to the bottom. And now we have all of our accessories laid right before us. Here's that little fishing line I made for the piglin with the fishing rod. With all of these ready to be attached, let's sit back for a little bit and enjoy the process of bringing life to this diorama. All silliness aside, and as I consider hooking another piglin on the end of this fishing line, let us take a final look at this nether-themed pocket diorama. Ooh boy, this one took me a little bit. Thank you so much for watching all the way until the end. I have a bunch of fun plans for October, so November might be a bit slow, but just know I'm prepared to build anything from the ground up. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.